When Prince Mishkin, the protagonist of Fyodor Dostoyevsky's The Idiot, beholds Hans Holbein's famous painting, Christ in the Tomb, he exclaims with dread, "Why, a man's faith might be ruined by looking at that picture." It is understandable that an image of Christ, a being who is supposed to have ascended in the flesh, entombed and decomposing, with the pain and distorted pallor of death, would cause some distress to the faithful. Dostoevsky himself allows his atheistic character Ippolit to state the following. His body on the cross was therefore fully and entirely subject to the laws of nature. In the picture the face is terribly smashed with blows, swollen, covered with terrible swollen and blood-stained bruises, the eyes open and squinting. The large open whites of the eyes have a sort of dead and glassy glint. Looking at that picture, you get the impression of nature as some enormous, implacable and dumb beast, or to put it more correctly, much more correctly, though it may seem strange, as some huge engine of the latest design, which has senselessly seized, cut to pieces, and swallowed up impassively and unfeelingly a great and priceless being, a being worth the whole of nature and all its laws, worth the entire earth, which was perhaps created solely for the coming of that being. The picture seems to give expression to the idea of a dark, insolent, and senselessly eternal power to which everything is subordinated, and this idea is suggested to you unconsciously. The people surrounding the dead man, none of whom is shown in the picture, must have been overwhelmed by a feeling of terrible anguish and dismay on the evening which had shattered all their hopes and almost all of their beliefs in one fell blow. They must have parted in a state of the most dreadful terror, though each of them carried away with him a mighty thought which could never be wrested from him. And if, on the eve of the crucifixion, the Master could have seen what he would look like when he was taken from the cross, would he have mounted the cross and died as he did? But despite the feeling of an overwhelmingly powerful material world and a sense of despair in the faithful who behold this image, Prince Mishkin and Dostoevsky himself managed not only to maintain their faith, but seemed to have it strengthened by this image. It could be said that there is nothing more Christ-like than to sacrifice oneself, not only to die, but also to rot and undergo all forms of indignity. The spirit has incarnated in the flesh, and is subject to all the decay and degradation that the flesh must endure. If it were otherwise, if indeed Christ maintained his pristine image, so often depicted in religious art, wouldn't it create a sense of separation between us and him, between our bodies and our spirit? Dostoevsky once said, borrowing from St. Paul, "Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen." I think the key word here is hope, for faith is not confirmed by the bombast of ceremony or the pretension of rank and attainment. Faith is itself strongest where these external proofs are lacking. Faith is silent and invisible in its most pure form. This faith is also existential. It has to face death and decay. It is confronted with the starkness of materiality and does not try to flee into frictionless realms of fancy. It does not claim to have transcended the flesh, but instead to have transmuted it. That which was base is now considered sacred. What was once meaningless matter is now meaningful reality. We see this analogy played out in the Divine Liturgy, which no doubt Dostoevsky would have been intimately familiar with. The simple materials of wine and bread are transformed into the blood and body of Christ. And in our communion, we too are transformed into divine material, the Word made flesh. The mystic of today is surrounded by a loud and impressive modern world, instant gratification, media titillation, and excitement promised by every advertisement and every product. It should be no surprise that so often those who are attracted to the mysteries today have an expectation for something grand and overwhelming, enlightenment as a flash of light and a dizzying rapture of the senses. Psychedelic drugs will suffice if that is all one is after. But true communion with the Spirit is not a flash, but a slow burn. The mystic becomes the wick of a candle and is slowly dissolved in the fire of spirit. is not necessarily a complete overhaul of the personality, and if it was, wouldn't that suggest an escapist and almost suicidal temperament to the mystic? Enlightenment is not so far away from ourselves. We could miss it by casting too lofty a gaze, as Giulio Savola once said. On the initiatic path, great mysteries are accompanied by small truths, or by simple techniques of inner refinement that can lead one far. Many people have the possibility of acquiring spiritual knowledge and yet do not realize it because they are looking for sensational methods, far removed from their daily activity. Many people are very close to revelations, capable of transforming them deep inside, and yet do not realize it, since they look far away for sensational phantasms. In closing, I would suggest a short practical exercise. Lie on your back, in the same manner as Holbein's Christ. Allow your mind to slowly visualize the process of death and decay occurring in your own body. Know with certainty that this will someday come to pass. Do not flee from the discomfort, but see where it takes you. Allow the mind to speak. Note any spontaneous reflexive thoughts that follow, but avoid letting the mind drift into the chatter of everyday life. Those of you who have studied or practiced Eastern mysticism will notice that this exercise bears resemblance to Savasana, or the corpse pose of yoga, while sharing similarities with the Buddhist practice of visualizing one's own death and decay. This is echoed in the West with the oft-quoted memento mori, remember that you will die, an idea shared by Plato. The philosopher has no need to fear death, for to do philosophy is to practice dying. All who actually engage in philosophy aright are practicing nothing other than dying and being dead. In this video I've suggested two different ideas that occupy the same plane: the contemplation of death and the hope in the unseen. As human beings experiencing mortality, we find these thoughts naturally accompany one another. In a future video I hope to enlarge these themes, but for now we must part and allow silence to reign over us once more. Be well.